We've got your back. A couple things before we get started. Someone asked for an audio check, so if there is any problem hearing me or you can't hear me right now, go ahead and let me know in the questions pane or the chat pane. As of right now, it looks like we're doing well. Thanks, we can hear you. Good to go. Just so you know, this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be available to you when it's over. You'll also have access to the slides as well. There will be a time for questions at the end of the webinar. If we do not get to your question within the span of this hour, don't worry about it. I will send you the answer to your question via email. So questions, start thinking of them as we go along, and then you'll be able to type them in, and we can handle those as soon as the webinar is over. You may have also seen something about a coupon for MadCap software training. Mad Skills training, $100 off. I will give you that coupon code at the end of the webinar. And with that, I would like to introduce to you a gentleman who I met at Mad World. He is a remarkable human being. He is also absolutely brilliant, and he's the guy that's going to help you through the FrameMaker-to-Flare process. His name is John Welly, and he's joining us right now. Hi, John.
Hi, thank you. No pressure. So, I'm John Welly. I'm a technical writer. Have been so probably pushing 20 years if you count the time before my graduate work. I'm a certified Flare instructor and developer. And in terms of talking frame to Flare, I started using FrameMaker in version 4. Actually, the first online help I ever did was in FrameMaker. The economics were basically we were able to ship frame reader with locked frame files along with the product. So that was kind of early before Acrobat. But I've always been very print focused until recently and heavily involved in template design. I ran the templates for a couple of groups that I was in. I've been a Flare user since 1.0 and basically started from scratch. I had a client with no existing documentation and they let me use them as a guinea pig for this nice, cool new program that wasn't another tool that I'd had a bad experience with. And along the way, I learned HTML and CSS in part because I'm a tinkerer and just to manipulate things that Flare couldn't do yet in those early days. So who are you? I presume since you're here, you've got a bunch of documentation to get into Flare. Ideally, you're not under the gun. You know, you're not trying to do this tomorrow, and you're not working on production doc. Ideally, you have some knowledge of FrameMaker styles, you know, how the styles and reference pages and other such things work. Not only able but willing to spend a lot of time planning and experimenting before diving in. It will help if you know a bit of HTML or CSS, or at least not shy about poking into it. Also, Pam Coca did a webinar recently that you can find on MadCap's website. And finally, there's no magic bullet here, and that's one of the recurring themes. There's a lot of decisions to make along the way and compromises you'll be making, and no two conversions are the same. So it's kind of a composite case study. I'm coming at it from a large project perspective, but some of the basic concepts apply anywhere, and I myself still apply them when I do templates for people. The largest project that kind of set all this off was basically converting 50-odd frame documents in 10 weeks, over 3,000 pages. And it was really a question of how Kim and I, my wife who's also a tech writer, how we could tackle that in that time. We needed to do it efficiently. It had to be a repeatable process. And we basically set about trying to figure that out. There was a lot of planning involved. A good 30–40% of the time of that whole block was spent on just a handful of docs, figuring out the process from one end to the other, working on template styling, working with the client to, you know, get things okay with them. So we'll discuss some of the basic processes and strategies that we use. also show some issues you might encounter here and there, both on the FrameMaker side and on the XHTML side, which is Flare. Just a high-level view of where we're going. We're going to spend time basically trying to evaluate what you have. A bunch of slides there. The next step is basically to start small, get a grip on all the styles and so forth that are probably built up in your frame doc. We're going to talk about cleaning up FrameMaker content. We're going to make a pitch for documenting your process. You then kind of finally do your Flare import, after which you are blessed with text files, which you can now use any text editor to clean up the XHTML. And then I just got a few thoughts after that of things to think of before you go full bore into the rest of the conversion. So before I get into this too far, let's totally derail for a moment. Is it worth converting at all? And this is one of the, again, recurring themes. You need to continually do this time spent versus gain. What's the payoff that you're getting? If you've just got a small number of short docs, it might just be easier to cut and paste or export it to text and kind of copy it into Flare. If you've got some longer documents, you can use Flare basically as a conduit to go through and chop it up into chunks based on the heading levels, and then massage the content later. For a really big project, the time you spend on any kind of process can definitely pay off. Some of this also matters. Another theme that will come up is if you're working on your own stuff or somebody else's. There's also a little subtlety. Are you converting to Frame or migrating to Frame or a Flare, sorry, or a bit of both? You know, are you just switching tools to reproduce the same content, or is there other stuff going on? For instance, I had a client that had a stable product. They just wanted a richer help system and better context sensitivity without the WebWorks chop my linear book into chunks mechanics. In another case, I was brought in to do a conversion, a large conversion, and it was basically two products being merged under new UI. And we made the decision not to do the conversion because figured all the work that went into that, they would still then have to go and rewrite and move things around and so forth. So in that case, my work ended up focusing on the templates and basically giving them the templates and so forth to drop the frame content into as they worked. But your goals may be different, and it may be a straight shot from frame to Flare. It may, you know, take you a few different directions. And again, there's nothing wrong with right now taking your frame book, plugging it into Flare, doing an import, and seeing what happens. And you'll be doing that a lot. And if the output is exactly what you want, you're golden. So first part, the evaluate and analyze. You want to look at a variety of documents, not just one, especially if it's not content that you're familiar with. For instance, if you're doing this, you know, client is coming to you, here's our docs, we want to convert them. You really want to go through and take notes and figure out all of the ins and outs of what's there. Because ultimately you need to decide whether you're going to implement everything that's there or decide not to, and then how you're going to do it. So for instance, you know, the first thing, what styles are actively used? You know, what are they doing in this document? Is it simple? Is it complex? Are there a lot of overrides? Why are there a lot of overrides? Were the writers just getting lazy and making up styles as they went along? Was it just from people fiddling with page breaks so they could get their output to look good? Are they compensating for a format that actually should be created on its own and not, you know, turned into an override? How consistent is the document structure? Consistency is your friend. It's very important. And just for instance, between your chapter title and your first heading, do you always have text between there, sometimes, or never? Or likewise between H1 and H2, do you always have text? Do you always have text or a heading before a procedure or not? And clients who've actually kind of trashed their style guides that were not entirely consistent because it just makes it very painful. If there are any layout dependent design elements, and the first thing I think of is side heads in FrameMaker, which are a classic thing there. You can do it with a float and Flare, but you need to have a consistent structure. So you need to know where you're anchoring it to and know that it'll line up nicely and so forth. How are notes and tips implemented for people who do a lot of those? Sometimes they're done as paragraphs, like the little note picture here, and basically that top and bottom are being pulled off a reference page. Or another classic FrameMaker implementation is to have a note first that pulls the icon in the top line, and then kind of a note body, and then a note end that pulls in the bottom line. So there are often a number of styles involved in doing something like that. Sometimes they're done as tables. The little second picture there is basically a two-column table, one with the image and one with whatever the text is. Is there conditional text? Good news, Flare does conditional really well. But in terms of looking at what you have in your FrameMaker documentation, is there a lot of conditional text? Is it big sections? Is it small chunks? Are there a ton of conditions? Are they still relevant even? Was there an old OEM build you did for somebody way back when that is no longer in business and you can just get rid of it altogether? So Flare will import the conditional content whether it's showing or not, but really I think you want to show it and just see it so you know what's there. In terms of tables, similar to the note table we showed just a second ago, how many formats of tables? Are there all different kinds? Is there just kind of one main corporate table format? Flare does table styles really well. How complex are the tables? Are there a lot of straddles and odd things that you might need to reproduce? Are they used for design elements? Like this was, I think, a code sample originally. The outline here, they were using the table cell for the outline and the background color. Also good to know, are there proper heading rows? Are the table headings inline formatted, or are they actual heading rows? Because that's something you're going to want in Flare so you can repeat the heading at the top of each page and so forth for long tables. Take a look at how bullets and numbers are implemented. There are a lot of different styles for that. Is there just a numbered and an alpha, or does it go down a couple more levels to Roman? Is there a basic bullet style, or are there 4 or 5 levels with different icons? Are the headings numbered? In terms of cross-references, are you looking basically cross-referencing to headings, or are there figure and table captions you're referring to, because that will be something you'll need to implement? Are there any references to specific step numbers? Go back to see step 3 on page something. You can't do that with an HTML list. You need an auto-numbered paragraph, and the benefit of you coming from FrameMaker is you already have auto-numbered paragraphs, so you're ahead of the game there. In terms of graphics, see what you have. Are they embedded or referenced? Frame users are generally pretty good about referencing graphics in, but if you do have embedded graphics, can you find the source art for it? If not, Flare will still bring the graphic in. It'll just kind of take the image as it is, and you may lose some fidelity depending on how it was inserted. It's good to know what formats. Flare will accept just about anything from bitmaps to vector art, EPS, and it will on demand as you are building online output, it will do the conversion for you to a web-safe format if necessary. So you just need to be aware of what's happening with your output. Where are the graphic frames anchored? Are they just like the illustration here, that little marker at the end of the paragraph, or is it in its own anchor paragraph? Long ago, there's a client, we actually had an anchor paragraph that was 2 points high just to have the tables and images on their own, and I believe that was for WebWorks conversion of some sort. Also, to use graphics inline, any kind of icons in the middle of the text and so forth. And in general, anything else of note, just get a really good idea of what you have to work with. So now that you've reviewed everything, you want to start small. Pick a couple documents to work with. One can be clean, and one should be the messiest thing you have. It should be a disaster, overrides, what have you. You could also build a composite sampler document if you don't have any necessarily representative documents. Just copy a little bit of everything into one file so you can work with it. The goal is you want to have a complete picture of all the situations you may deal with, not only formats and styles and so forth, but is there text between the two headings? Is there text before or after the paragraph? Is there a list inside a paragraph? A list inside a list? Anything that you might need to deal with, it's good to have all in one place so you can experiment with that. I'm personally kind of clean and simple person. And legacy documents, FrameMaker documents, just accumulate a lot of junk. And it depends how old they are and how many people have worked with them over the years. You get all kinds of extra styles in your catalog, indent a little more, indent just a little bit more. Lots of overrides creep in and never get cleared out. Extra master pages come in and don't get purged, extra reference pages, just a lot of stuff. By the way, Cruft is a technical term, essentially anything that's leftover, redundant, and getting in the way. To this, a valid thing you can say, hold on, but if all these formats aren't being used in my content, then Flare will just ignore them when it does the input. So I can just, not worry about cleaning that up and, clean the other stuff later. That's entirely valid, and you need to decide how much that bothers you. I tend to work in code view a lot, and just the various messy things. I think of code gremlins. I'll show some later. I just find distracting when I'm actually trying to look for my content that I'm working with. But you need to decide on the amount of cleanup that's worthwhile. And again, do an import, play with a few of the different style mappings and see what you get. If visibly it looks okay, then you're fine. And if the little stuff in the background doesn't bother you, you can always go back in a later phase and clean that up. But there's just a ton of ways you could tinker around. And so somewhere you need to figure out where you're drawing the line, how much cleanup you want to do. So before we go too much farther, still actually playing, right now you're just looking at the files, make a full list of all the FrameMaker styles you're using. And think of this whole exercise, we're about to do a style map. Take it as an opportunity to start fresh and trim out all the stuff that's built up. I suggest making a spreadsheet that has all of the frame styles and then basically try to map them over to Flare styles. And in terms of figuring out what you actually need, start with the basics. A few heading formats, you probably have a body and a body indent, a couple kinds of lists, maybe captions. But start simple and then build out if you need to. Also, don't hang on to old naming conventions just for the sake of it. You don't need p.body. You know, p is fine. P is a standard HTML paragraph. Some paragraph styles may be merged perhaps because they're close enough. The indent a little more, a little more, a little more might just be a, an indent. If you're not sure about what to do with a style, then just leave it alone and import it because we can fix that later. That's not a problem. And actually, when I set up templates for a client, I provide them with a matrix kind of like this, but a lot longer and a lot more complex that basically goes into every style they have in their style sheet, what it looks like in online, what it looks like in print, and how to use it. So this could get quite detailed, but just at a few examples at a high level, frame style, body, table body. It's not uncommon in FrameMaker to have a whole set of table X, table body, table bullet, so forth. In Flare, again, I just say P. It's a paragraph. You don't necessarily need the table formatting. There's lots of ways to implement it, but you can do without all that. So try it without all that first. In terms of heading, you have heading to break, heading to no break, heading to extra space, various things that people make along the way as they tweak, how their page layout turns out. Again, just use the standard H1, H2, not H2 heading 2, or even worse, H2 dot heading 1. And with the CSS, you can handle the breaks, page breaking later, and there's a few CSS tricks that can help you with soft breaks. If you have code samples, kind of that sort of thing in your doc, sometimes they're defined as paragraphs, sometimes it's just someone selects the text and hits courier. If you do a lot of code stuff, you're actually going to probably want both paragraph and character level, a p.code and a span.code. And the paragraph would basically, set it to a monospace font, perhaps have the pre-tag there so it preserves any kind of white space. In the last cell here, in terms of numbering, this is another category of styles that tend to explode in FrameMaker. You have step first, step next, then you have an indented set and an alpha set and an indented alpha set and a table set, and there's first styles and next styles and what have you. Try to peel all those back. I try to start and stick with something like p-numbered, p-alpha, where p-alpha is indented to fall under p-numbered, and try to keep it as simple as possible. And you may not even need the first next styles. If you're not using numbered headings, you can actually use the heading, if you only have one topic per, or for the most part, one topic, procedure per topic. You can use the headings to reset the numbered steps to 0, so each one starts automatically at 1. And you can set the numbered step style to reset the alpha to 0, so that after every numbered step, alpha will automatically start at A. And again, when I set up templates for people, I want the writers to be able to sit and write and have a few core styles to pick off of their style palette and not have to go sift through a whole list. So I try to keep it minimal. So now, before you start really messing, now you got your sample made. Before you start messing with documents, make a backup. Make a lot of backups. I tend to duplicate folders, my project, before each kind of major thing I do in case it blows up and you can't always undo. It's not unusual for me to have a few gigs worth of stuff at the end of a long project that I just go and flush out, but more than once have had to go back a few steps and resurrect something that I thought I could do away with that ended up being handy. So in terms of cleaning up your FrameMaker files, the old escape FIO is the import format box, and essentially you can, if you're not familiar with this, you can import a document's own styles into itself and kill all the overrides. You can also, if you're feeling a little more detailed, go through and delete everything out of the catalogs and re-import a clean template. Either way, you're still going to have a lot of retagging to do probably, and possibly some renaming that doesn't help you with merging and so forth. But doing that on a lot of files takes a lot of time. So there are some third-party tools that can be really helpful here. The ones I use most are from Silicon Prairie Software. They have paragraph character table tools that will basically go through and do a report. These formats are being used, these aren't. You can rename them, you can nuke overrides, you can do all sorts of stuff. And they're cheap. I think they're $10 a license, and they're very handy. And I'll demo that in a second after the heavy lifting slide. FrameScript. And FrameScript is a full-on scripting language, and it's great for tasks that are really complicated or they have a lot of steps, but yet it's still repetitive. It was 150 a seat. I actually just got email, I think, yesterday that I have a new version out, and it's on sale this month, so it's actually less than that. If you have FrameScript already, you're golden. If you don't, then it's probably not an option unless you really have a lot of stuff to do with it. And the resource I've used is Rick Quattro, who is the god of FrameScript. I had a previous client whose doc was really driven by FrameScript, but I knew some. But there were some things I needed to do on this project that would have taken me a couple days to figure out the scripting. It was like an afternoon. He pulled bits from his library and had me a script to work with. By the way, if you do have FrameScript, there's a German localization company that has this iframe tool set, which is kind of along the lines of Silicon Prairie, but a lot deeper. But they're really expensive, and they do rely on FrameScript. So let me hop into my virtual PC here. So I just have a sample document I'm working with here. This is actually the sample I sent Rick to help develop some scripts for what I was doing. But just to show a couple things, like paragraph tools, you can list the paragraph usage, and right up it'll say, here are the ones that are being used, here are the ones that aren't. Good to know. Likewise with characters. And you may have a lot of redundancy. For instance, this paragraph here, this relief character style is essentially the same as this one, which is italic. So say I want to combine those into one. There is a nifty thing you can do where you can basically create a conversion document, and you can convert all the tags in the document or just tags in use. But again, imagine this becomes more helpful as the scale of the project gets larger. So if I create a conversion doc for just the ones that are in use, and I'm going to take this relief and rename it italic, and then these other ones will just stay whatever they are. I now go back to my document, and I can go convert characters. Do I want to convert character tags? Yes. And now this is italic, and this is italic. I can go and do a character usage. It must be somewhere else in there using relief. You could always remove, purge our unused character tags. And again, there's some fiddling around here. in terms of FrameScript, and FrameScript is a full-on scripting language. It's pretty deep. One of my little things here, basically, this little routine deletes all the reference pages in a file. But what I wanted to do was I wanted Rick to find a certain kind of table, like basically they were using the 2-column note tables, and I didn't want to have that set up. I wanted to handle those differently in the output. Likewise, they used a bunch of these excuse me, code samples that were in 1-cell tables. They were using that for the background and border, and there are better ways to do that in CSS. So he wrote me this script that basically, when I run it, boom, they're gone. That's no longer in a table. That's no longer in a table. This is kind of where it was. And again, doing this over dozens of documents, usually when I say 57 FrameMaker documents, those were books, so dozens of actual files becomes really, really handy. So before you actually go ahead and do your import into Flare, you've got a grip on what's going on with the FrameMaker side now. Take the time to stop and document what you did, your process. It's easy to forget as you go on, especially if you have to take a break and switch over to an actual production project. It's easy to forget the sequence of steps or why you did them, and aside from me having a lousy memory, if you're going to have multiple people helping you do the final conversion, you need, again, something that's repeatable. You need everyone doing the same thing. So again, make notes of any other quirks you might have found that you're not sure how to deal with. Make another backup, drink more coffee, never hurts. When I talk about documenting process, this is a sample of what I mean in terms of the detail. Run paragraph tools, run this script, list paragraph usage, the list should be shorter, delete unused tags, it should be just these now. Just a lot of detail of what I was doing, and then Kim went through and verified this on her end that everything was working the same. But it's, again, depending on how much time you're spending, something like this is very, very helpful. So finally, the import to Flare part. And again, I'll say it's an iterative process. You're going to be doing this a lot and tweaking and getting things just the way you want them, again, depending on how particular you are. There are all sorts of import parameters that you can tweak. That's a few sessions of its own. Remember that you can create multiple import files within a project, each that's aiming at different frame books or frame documents and that uses different settings. The import file is basically kind of a recipe. Grab this file, convert this to this, this to this, break it up here. I also recommend avoiding using subheadings within topics. I know there are people who are very print-minded who have trouble with this, as I once did. But at this point, map heading 1 to H1, heading 2 to H2. Ultimately, I change everything to H1, but you can do that later. And this is basically a cruel keys to another session I'm preparing on why you would want to do that. So after you do the import, sit back, relax, enjoy it. Flare is built on XHTML, CSS. They're all standards. It's all text. You can edit them in Notepad. The Flare project file, the FLPRJ itself, is just a few lines of text, not there was another product that used to have kind of the project was actually a database, and if it got corrupted, you were sort of hosed. All of these Flare files in your project now are just text. It's XML. I still recommend, and again, Flare now does a lot of this stuff. It didn't early on. But since I work a lot in text, think about a powerful text editor, something that can do recursive search and replace and use regular expressions and grep. I use Text Wrangler the most, or TextEdit if I'm on the Windows side. I would also recommend, unsolicited plug, get a license for MadCap Analyzer if you don't already have one. It's extraordinarily useful in finding things like styles that might be defined, styles that are undefined, any number. Again, a whole session on this kind of information analyzer can give you, but it's definitely, if you have the Flare license and not the MadPack, go ahead and download the analyzer demo and play with it. So now that we're dealing in text, just kind of a look, I was referring to Code Gremlins, bonus points if you know what that logo is from. This first set of, in this first bullet here, it's stuff that's harmless. There's no visible output from it. But again, working in text, I find it really annoying because it just masks all of the actual content I'm trying to work with. Things, my favorite is the B style font weight normal, which basically negates itself. You'll often find spaces that have tags applied to them. Okay, now we have an italic space, which is also helpful. You may have an empty span, which does nothing. Like a div, a span is just a container, so you're basically saying this stuff, whatever's in here is contained, but we're not going to do anything with it. And you often find C data. Basically what those do is it says don't process whatever is inside this, but that actually occurs most often when there are some extra spaces, because extra spaces don't exist in HTML. So that stuff's really easy to clean up, and actually if you have a long list of things you want to do, there's a nifty app called Advanced Find and Replaced, and you can basically just make your whole list of things, plug them in, boom, it will do it, all of them at once across all of your directories, and it's very nice and quick. Some other things to think about, kind of okay but not so great, and these are things that involve inline formatting at the character level. If you've got, if you want bold italic text, you've got B style, font style italic, or conversely, I style, font weight bold. I recommend doing a span for that. Again, span class bold italic. And actually, I'm in the habit now of not using B or I or M or whatever. I use spans for all of my character styling. But when you get down this last bullet, anything at a block level, like paragraph, you don't want to have a style, any kind of style setting there, because that will basically ignore any style sheet, style settings that you're working on. That wins over anything else. So you may cook up on your style sheet a really nice paragraph style, and whatever this is, it doesn't matter, it won't follow that. What you want are classes, not styles. And if you don't know what the difference between them, that's the good kind of pick up a basic CSS book. So I mentioned regular expressions and grep, and it's really just really powerful search and replace. And more so, there's things called back references, which is basically like doing a search and replace with wildcards. Not the most intuitive, but it can save you a lot of time. I'll show you a couple tools here that are fun to play with. This one's called regex buddy. So say I'm trying to figure out, I want to get rid of the style text here. So say I know I want that, and then there's a style equals, the dot is any character, the asterisk is as many of them as there are. And then the right brace. Now, notice that without that brace, it's pulling all of that. There are certain characters like the question mark there will basically limit it to the first time it gets a question mark. Another one of these, and basically, I'll show you a back reference. If this is the part I want to preserve, and this is the part I want to get rid of, I'm going through this fast, but so basically I've got that needs to go right there. But if I want to have this, there's a back reference. I can go \1 and \3, and there are different flavors of regex for different languages. Some of them use $signs, etc. But essentially, I'm saying go find any kind of body, get rid of the style tag, and just put back whatever happened to be else inside the paragraph. Regex magic is kind of a different approach to it. You basically, you pick a section of text and you kind of mark it. And you pick a different section, mark it. Pick a different section, mark it. And then you basically specify how you want to treat each one. For instance, I would make this a span class italic, leave the text, and then instead of a close I, I'd do a close span. And those are from Just Great Software. So you've done a lot of cleanup. You've gone through the code, you've killed the stuff that really needs to be killed. There may be some gremlins you're not addressing. You could always go back and do that later. Just other things to think about before you go all in and do the rest of the conversions. Organize your stuff. If you bring in a book, you're basically going to have a flat folder named for the book that has a ton of files in it. For instance, you may have all your graphic files will be in there along with your topics and so forth. So say the normal place Flare puts images is content resources images. So you could, from the Content Explorer, grab all the image files. You can even filter it and then drag it into content resources images. And Flare will go through and see if any of them are where they're being linked from and fix all the links for you. Another way, in a kind of mass way, is just to go in Windows Explorer, and remember that Windows Explorer, Content Explorer is basically a Windows Explorer view of your project. But you could just drag them there outside of Flare and then relink them with a search and replace. I'll show that in a sec. Another thing to think about are file naming conventions. By default, Flare will name the topics with the heading that it's breaking the topic up into. You can always redo those later. And actually, even on the FrameMaker side, you can put special markers in the headings that will tell Flare what to name the file, but that itself is a lot of time to go through and do that. But for instance, one of my examples in my style sheet, I have an icon class of image that basically adds a little padding on each side and drops it a few points below baseline because it bugs me when icons and text are like bumping up above it. So you can, go through, and if you know that all your icons start with a certain, ICN underscore, you can go through and just do that all at once without going individually and applying that class. Another just large scale picture thing is just how your projects are going to fit together. How many Flare projects do you need? I could have done that 50-odd documents in a single Flare project. It would have been confusing as heck to keep track of. So, figure out where the boundaries are there. And again, that's a whole session of its own. Also think about how you might use a master project, or in Flare terms, global project linking. There's also something called external resources now, which is basically a way of taking some of the core files like your style sheets and page layouts and making them consistent and shared across all of various documents so everyone's stuff doesn't start wandering apart. I wanted to go back to the regex for a moment. When I was talking about putting the what my images and resources images, if I do a find, say I want to look for a PNG or a GIF, and I can go through and basically in one shot and pretend this is, this is just a simple text file, but it could be hundreds of files. I can go and replace all, and now they're all in resources images like I was talking about before. Likewise, if anything is, let's have my icon search. If I know that I have something, now I'm winging it a sec here. So anything ending with an icon, I want to replace that with, and if I did that right, oops, undo. That's what backups are for. There should be a back reference. There we go. So that's a way of doing that very quickly. So what now? Now you've got, you did your frame stuff, you bought it into Flare, now you've cleaned up your HTML code. Go back and update the process doc. Figure out if it's detailed, if it describes what you did. Grab another document or two out of the pool and run them through the process to see if you get the same thing. You may have missed a situation in your sampler document that you need to account for. And basically keep going through till you're comfortable with results and document what they are. And once that's done, you can, grab a bunch of people and brute force your way through the rest of the conversions. And you're done. It's just that simple. So back to kind of sum up here. Evaluate and analyze, basically really find out what you're dealing with, spend time there. Then they start small, again, is getting a sample of all the little situations you may need to deal with so you can decide if you want to deal with them or if you want to let go of them. You need to get a grip on your styles. Make a map from frame to flare. Standard HTML styles are good. Don't make it more complicated than you need to. We talked about frame cleanup, just kind of getting things tidy on that side. Documenting the process. Once you have the process documented, import to Flare, and now you've got text files, so you can use regex or anything else, kind of XHTML cleanup. And finally, after that, start thinking bigger picture. And that's it. And so I'll hand it back to Jen with the Mad World side. This was an awesome conference. Again, unsolicited plug.
Why, thank you, John. It's Jennifer White, Product Evangelist with MadCap Software, and we'll get into questions in just a bit. First, though, Mad World. Mad World 2014 is coming up. There is an early bird discount, and we are still looking for people to submit some sessions. So if you're interested in speaking, just head over to this website, madworldconference.com, and you'll be good to go. And then, as promised, on the next slide, I have for you a discount. This is $100 off of Mad Skills training just for attending today's webinar. Your discount code is MSTRN100. All you need to do is get in contact with us and schedule yourself some training. Mention that discount code, and then you are going to be good to go with $100 off. This webinar has been recorded. We are going to send you the link to the webinar a little bit later on, and also a link to John's slides. If we don't get to your question, we only have a few minutes to get through some questions. If we don't get to yours, don't sweat it. We're going to be sending out an email afterwards with the answer to your question. So Bueller, does anyone have any questions? Let's begin with, now let's start with Linda. Linda says, in regard to file names, John, we've run into trouble with numerals converting. Do you have any advice there?
Numerals converting. I'm not sure I've come across that. I am a stickler coming from Unix about using underscores instead of spaces. The only thing that comes to mind in terms of numerals are the habit of naming files or chapters or folders after their position in the book, because then if they move, then everything's out of whack.
Not to interrupt, I'm sorry, but Linda included an example just now. She says image1.jpg, for example.
Okay, so that's probably something that was an unreferenced graphic that basically Flare imported and named. So that's the kind of thing we just need to go back and rename them. And that's where if you have the source art from your FrameMaker document, then it will be named for the actual file.
Cool. Tony asks, how do you manage keeping in images and paragraphs together in the CSS when your target is a PDF?
What I do, I use a div, I call it div keep together. Define a class of div in your style sheet that has page break before set, page break inside set to avoid, and basically that'll hold those together.
Okay. A different Linda would like to know, do you need to clean up your FrameBackup.fm files before your conversion?
You don't need to. I tend to do it out of habit, but if you point Flare at the FrameMaker book, it will just grab the book files.
All right. And Elisa wants to know, some FrameMaker photos are not going into the Flare image folder. Do you know why that is?
For a conversion, I'm not sure that they do. I think they all show up in the folder named for the book, I believe.
Okay. Okay, and let's see here. Priscilla says, we use structured FrameMaker, not unstructured. Therefore, we use DTD and EDD. Can Flare use our existing DTD, EDD, and easily convert it into Flare's environment?
I have not used structured FrameMaker for many years, so I would have to refer that back to the wonderful folks at MadCap support.
Cool. And Priscilla, we will send you an email with the answer to that question a little bit later on. All right. Let's see. Aptala says, I have trouble with images when I import a framebook into Flare. Specific image names are converted into generic image names. For instance, accounts.jpg is converted to 001.jpg.
Take a look and see if there's anything else in the frame. It sounds like there might be either a call out or some other thing behind the image in the frame. If you're talking before Flare 9, it basically, if there were multiple things in an anchored frame, it just flattens them into an image. And since it can't grab just the image file, it just gives it an arbitrary name. So that would be my first guess.
Okay. Brian wants to know, in your opinion, are Flare auto-numbering capabilities as robust and reliable as those in FrameMaker?
I think they're exactly the same as FrameMaker. Same with cross-references, same basic constructs. And I use auto-numbering for numbered and bulleted lists. I don't use HTML lists at all.
Okay. Eliza says, how can we migrate from the generated table styles and standalone files to a cleaner style type?
Basically, you want to create separate table styles in Flare, if I'm getting the right question. And once you set something up, you can actually, there's essentially a nuke and pave control that'll go through and assign that to every table, either in your project or in select parts of your project, and overwrite any formatting that's there.
Okay. Rick says, can you apply multiple conditional text settings to the same segment of text, and is it stable? That's something we've had a problem with in FrameMaker.
Yes, you can. Flare handles conditional text really nicely. I was never a fan in FrameMaker because you could, if it was hidden, you could basically delete a whole section of your book without ever knowing it if you just happened to grab that marker. But yes, you can assign any number of conditions to a segment, and just be aware when you're doing your targets that you're conditionalizing by exclusion, not inclusion.
Okay, this is from Karen. My frame styles keep popping up in Flare even though I've deleted them from Frame. What do we do about that?
Maybe an override, maybe. I would tend to go through and just rename them. And again, that's something, and of course, if you have a FrameMaker style that's not in your Flare style sheet, then it basically becomes, a regular paragraph or something. Something like Analyze would basically point you at any style that was not defined in your style sheet, and right there let you reassign it.
Okay, Penny says, any advice for handling graphics that are shared from a common source directory in source control? She's using Perforce. Can Flare just point to that directory instead of including it?
I believe, and I'm not sure if this changed in Flare 9, if it's going to go out with your output, it needs to be in your project.
Okay. We'll look into that a little further and send Penny that answer as well. And then Annalise has another question. How do you handle importing photos with callouts and bubbles?
Again, if you have Flare 9, there's an option in the FrameMaker import. It will actually create a layered MadCap capture file for you that will let them, it'll preserve the layers so you can edit those.
Okay. Lynn says, when I import, the one FrameMaker document is split up into several topics. For example, one for the first paragraph, then another for another section. How can I keep it in one document?
Can you say that again?
Yep. The FrameMaker document is split up into several topics. For example, one topic will be for the first paragraph, then another topic for another section. How can I keep it in one document?
When you set up your FrameMaker import file, there's a new topic styles tab, and basically you tell it where you want it to make breaks. So maybe you have a body style or something, you're breaking at an extra place that you don't necessarily want to, perhaps. You might
Okay.
guess.
And should you import from the existing TOC from a FrameMaker book, or is it more efficient to build it in Flare? Should you import the should you import the existing TOC from a FrameMaker book, or is it more efficient to build the TOC in Flare?
It doesn't hurt to bring it in. You can always create a different one. That's part of that session I'm cooking up. The important thing to realize that I've had a lot of questions on in classes, in FrameMaker, a TOC is basically a generated list that tells you what content you have in your documents. In Flare, it's kind of the reverse. The TOC is the thing that tells you what is going to be in your document. So that distinction is really important.
Okay, and I think we're going to go with just one more because we don't have much time left. But Davor would like to know, are there any recommendations for dealing with math in the conversion process?
There is, Flare supports MathML. There is an equation editor. I don't know how that would necessarily be constructed on the FrameMaker side. That would probably, if you can export it, honestly, I don't know how they would be implemented in FrameMaker, whether it's just text or vector art or what have you, but if it is somehow in MathML, Flare supports that.
Cool. And with that, John, we got to wrap it up. As I mentioned before, any questions that we didn't get to in this Q&A session or any that we need more clarification on, we'll be sending out an email with those answers a little bit later on today or tomorrow. John, you were fantastic and fabulous. Thank you so much for this webinar. It was super informative. We will be sending out the link to the webinar itself and also to John's slides a little bit later on as well. And everybody's chiming in and saying thank you and great session. So on behalf of MadCap Software, thank you all. Oh, Jeffrey, I have to include this. Jeffrey said, John, was this your first webinar? If so, I foresee a long and happy career.
I've taught many classes. This was my first webinar.
You rocked it. So I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar for everyone now. Keep an eye out for email from MadCap with all the answers and the links that you need. And everybody have a spectacular rest of your day. Bye-bye.